is a book. It's a classic. The most beautiful stories of Beatrix Potter. That's not the classic itself, but however, the stories inside, what the Livrello Lerlou says is the most beautiful stories of Beatrix Potter. That's actually one of the classics of inside. You might know her actual stuff, her stories. The Tale of Peter Rabbit, the Tale of Squirrel Nutkin, the Tailor of Gloucester, the Tale of Benjamin Bunny, the Tale of Mrs. Tiggy Winkle, the story of Fierce Bad Rabbit, and the story of Miss Muppet. Well, we all know that her most famous character is Peter Rabbit. The naughty little rabbit that's, well, comes from a family whose dad got killed and turned into a pie. This was written in 1902, meaning that it is 121 years old. So the story goes on like this. Once upon a time, there was this guy named Peter Rabbit, and then he also had these brothers and sisters called Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter, and they all lived with their mother in this little in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. Hope you can see it. This is drawn by Beatrix Potter, by the way. And then the Miss Rabbit goes out and tells her children that to go down those fields in the lane and to be able to pick berries and things, but not to go into the garden of Mr. McGregor's garden, and that their father had an accident there and he was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Rabbit pie, wonder why that's tasty at all anyway. And she gave Peter for his jacket. This second pair of jacket turns out. And then she goes out, takes a basket, and goes to buy some bread and stuff, like milk. They are good buddies. These guys, the Flopsy, Cottontail, and Mopsy, that's her name, are good. So they just go for blackberries. Peter, who's very naughty, just goes straight to Mr. McGregor's garden. So first, he eats lettuces and some French beans and then some more radishes. And then he also eats some lettuces. And then he feels rather sick, so he goes out to look for some parsley to eat to cure the stomachache, as lots of people think that's true. And then when he goes around, and he goes to the place where turns out, it's supposed to be parsley, he meets Mr. McGregor, who goes on a wild goose chase against him. There's a wild goose chase that's been happening almost every time. And then finally, Peter Rabbit somehow just goes around his fay and finds the gate. He loses his shoes and jacket, so technically he's clothesless. And then he goes back to home. And then because he was a big bad rabbit, he's given some untasty tea and then sent to bed, while his brothers and sisters, Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, have bread, milk, and blackberries for supper. The ones they picked. Okay. Yes, that's tastier than the whatever Peter ate. Then we go for the Tale of Squirrel Nutkin. Basically, there's a squirrel who goes. There are these squirrels, and there's this squirrel named Squirrel Nutkin, and then they go to an island for a harvest time of nuts, and bring an offering. Nights turns out to the owl who owns the island and lives the island, and asks permission. Squirrel Nutkin just goes very rudely and makes riddles, and almost around just goes to sleep. Grab nuts. Next day, come back with more offerings, ask the same thing, and Squirrel Nutkin just gives another riddle. And that happens for several more days again, for like 6-7 times. And finally, Mr. Brown is kind of annoyed because finally the Squirrel Nutkin jumps onto his face. So Squirrel Nutkin's about to be skinned, but then he escapes by actually cutting his, snapping his tail in two, and escapes. And according to the book, from this day on, if you tell Squirrel Nutkin a riddle or whatever he told Mr. Brown, and then he'll stamp his feet and curse to you and say some bad words. And speaking of which, this story was published in 1903, which was the next year. So that's kind of a big surprise for anyone who kind of comes here to do things. And then next we have the story of the Tailor of Gloucester. The Tale of Gloucester is also published in 1903. This one has like mice who help the tailor make a coat because the naughty cat of the tailor does not give him the silk that he needs to actually make the coat and become rich so that he will not die. And this Tailor of Gloucester story is actually pretty long too, so yeah. Next, after the story of Tailor Gloucester, we get to the sequel to the Tale of Peter Rabbit, which is the Tale of Benjamin Bunny in 1904, who is also sort of naughty. So one morning, this little rabbit sat on a bank, and he pricked his ears and listened to the trip trot of a pony. And then when he did, he finally realized that the McGregors were gone for the day because they're wearing their finest clothes to, well, a gig, which is kind of a musical thing. And as soon as they pass little Benjamin Bunny comes and goes to Peter Rabbit's place. Also, he doesn't want to look for his aunt. He wants to look for Peter Rabbit, who's wrapped up in a blanket. He has fur, so I don't really know why he would need clothes. And tells him the tale of Peter Rabbit to him, with a few little twitches, of course. And then they finally go ahead and find his clothes, grab them, and try to get some onions, let go of some onions too at the same time. And then when Peter Rabbit finally comes back, there's a big applause because he brought back some onions and he found his clothes, which smell like onions. Okay, that part's not in the story. Finally, we have the tale of Miss Tinky Winkle, a hedgehog who does some laundry and doesn't ask for anything in return, does their laundry, and doesn't ask anything for return, like no washing bill or stuff. This is Miss Tinky Wiggle. Then we have the story of Fierce Bad Rabbit from 1906. This is pretty old. The Fierce Bad Rabbit talks about good rabbits and bad rabbits and what happens to bad people. There's this good rabbit whose mother gave him a carrot. Bad rabbit sees the carrot and he wants to have some carrot. He doesn't say please, he just takes it, and then a guy with a gun, at least that's what happens. The good rabbit actually creeps away and hides in a hole, and he feels sad. This is a man with a gun who's basically a hunter, and he sees something that looks like on the bench. He thinks it's a very funny bird because he loves birds and every animal he sees, other than humans, he sees it as a bird, especially if it's small. He comes up creeping behind the trees, and then he shoots. And what he shoots is actually kind of the interesting part of the story too. This is what happens. Boom! He shot the whiskers off. He shot the tail off. And Good Rabbit actually peeps at a hole just to see what happened, and then he sees Bad Rabbit tearing past without any tails or whiskers. So basically the gun shot his whiskers, tails clean off. Which is bad if you're a rabbit. Also, this also has a moral. Good rabbits, good people may feel sad, but at least there's punishment for the bad people. Yay! And finally, the last story I'm going to tell you about in 1906 is the story of Miss Moppet. Obviously, there are more stories that are continued every year. There are more stories from Beatrix Potter than this. But these are the classics and the most beautiful stories of Beatrix Potter. In 1906, she published a story about a cat named Miss Moppet, who's a pussy. Also, to me, she looks like a pussy kitten. And then she tries to grab a mouse, and she's too late, and she misses the mouse and hits her own head onto the cupboard, and she thinks it's a very, very, very hard cupboard. So she just ties it up in a duster. At least that's what it's called. Yeah, in a duster. To look like that. And finally, afterwards, she sits before the fire because she looks worse and worse and worse. The mouse wants to come inside and just to be curious, and then suddenly, it turns out it's a trick. Miss Muppet catches the mouse. Since the mouse has teased Miss Muppet actually thinks she will tease the mouse. Fair. She ties the mouse in the duster and tosses it around like a ball, as if it's a yarn. I don't know how she tied it up, though. She might have had help from a human, but yeah, that's kind of a nice thing. But she forgot about the hole in the duster, so when she untied it, there was no mouse. He wriggled out and ran away, and he's dancing a jig on top of the cupboard, teasing her again. That's not nice of you. That's not nice of you. And so that is basically the end of all that seems to be going on from this book. So I hope you enjoyed that book of the most beautiful stories of Beatrix Potter. This is from the Portugal episode that I bought. So it's finally nice to actually start making a video about it in Dubai, which is extremely hot. So I'll see you soon. Schneid out. Peace. Bye.